Have you ever, looking into someone's eyes, felt that their words and their inner world exist in different dimensions? Perhaps behind a sincere smile, a casual joke, or a phrase, you caught something elusive but true and deep. Something unspoken, yet more real than any word. That feeling that words are merely a mask, a covering for what truly happens within. What if you could learn to perceive these signals not as vague premonitions, but as clear, discernible patterns? This video isn't about manipulation or cold reading techniques. It's about the ability to see, to truly see the psychological depths of human behavior. How daily actions and reactions reveal what is hidden from plain sight. What a person often doesn't even consciously realize. And in this, we will be aided by one of the most penetrating and at the same time most enigmatic thinkers, Haruki. Before you are 10 insights, but these are not merely philosophical thoughts. They are psychological principles derived from the very nature of humanity. Each reveals how a person protects themselves, projects their inner world, and plays roles in the endless drama they call their life. When you learn to recognize these behavioral patterns, you will not only discern others' truths, you will also begin to see those parts within yourself that have long remained in shadow, repressed, unrecognized, forgotten. First, masks that conceal truth. Each of us wears a mask. Haruki asserted, what we present to the world rarely corresponds to our true self. To be accepted, we create external images, shaped by fear and the desire to conform. These masks are not deception in its vulgar sense, but a subtle form of psychological defense. It is a method of adaptation we have honed since childhood. We construct these facades, layer by layer, to shield ourselves from judgment, rejection, from the pain of being authentic. Observe those moments when a person falls silent before answering, when they evade specific topics, when their movements become nervous and aimless. It is there, in these barely perceptible cracks, that truth begins to emerge. The true self cannot be entirely concealed. It pushes through the mask, like a sprout through asphalt, in moments of fatigue, in instances of unexpected candor, in what doesn't fit the carefully constructed image. These moments, these fragments of authenticity, are keys to understanding. For only where the facade begins to crack can we see a person as they truly are. Second, hatred, a mirror of the shadow. What we fiercely condemn in others is often a reflection of what we have rejected within ourselves. Long before the concept of psychological projection emerged, Haruki understood this phenomenon. Arrogance, deceit, weakness, cowardice. If you notice these traits in others with particular irritation, pause and consider. Are you perhaps suppressing something similar within yourself? Obsessive criticism, disproportionate condemnation. These are almost always consequences of internal conflict. It's as if our inner judge, seeing in another what we have forbidden ourselves, begins to shout to drown out its own discomfort. We condemn others to convince ourselves that we are not like them. But this strategy only deepens the internal rift. Trace your condemnations, and you may discover that part of yourself you've long denied, but which still demands recognition and integration. The truth you seek in others, you will find by looking into the mirror of your own unconscious. Third, the silence that speaks. Haruki regarded language with caution. For him, it was less an instrument of truth and more a means of masking power and subjugation. Words can lie, but silence almost never does. When a person suddenly falls silent, evades a direct question, answers vaguely, or abruptly changes the topic, do not rush to ignore it. A pause is not emptiness, it is a signal. The discomfort that arises in silence can reveal more than 1,000 beautifully constructed phrases. For it is in what we fear to name, what we avoid discussing, that true vulnerability is hidden. Silence often indicates pain, fear, or an internal conflict that a person is not yet ready to voice. It is the space where the desire to speak and the fear of being heard collide. Learn to listen to the silence, for it is there that truth is born. Silence is a cry that has not yet found words. Fourth, virtue as a cloak for ego. Sometimes, behind a facade of virtue hides not humility, but a refined form of vanity. Haruki saw, in the will to power, not only the desire for dominance over others, but also an inclination towards moral superiority, disguised as care and kindness. When someone too loudly proclaims their morality, demonstratively condemns others' actions, constantly gives advice, corrects others' behavior, it is cause for reflection. Whom are they trying to convince? Themselves or the whole world? That they are better, purer, superior. True virtue does not proclaim itself. It needs no recognition, applause, or sermons. It manifests in actions, not slogans. A truly mature person does not seek to appear good in the eyes of others. They simply do good, even if no one sees it. For their reward lies in the action itself, not in the reaction to it. Fifth, self-deception. Always the first step. Before a person deceives others, they deceive themselves. This is perhaps one of Haruki's most unsettling insights. Self-deception is not weakness, but a subtle, almost unconscious mechanism of self-preservation. The phrase, "I'm fine," is often uttered not for others, but for oneself. Repeated multiple times, it transforms into a mantra, convenient to believe, to avoid confronting pain, emptiness, or a truth that could shatter one's inner world. If you sense that something doesn't add up in someone's story, don't rush to suspect a lie. Often, before you is not a liar, but a person who has spent years convincing themselves of a fabricated version of reality. And the stronger this illusion, the deeper the pain it conceals. It's like building a house of sand on the ocean shore, desperately convincing oneself that the waves will not destroy it. Sixth, display of superiority born from fear. The desire to appear better, stronger, superior is not always pride. Often, it is a deep-seated fear of one's own insignificance. The fear of being unimportant, the fear of being forgotten. Haruki asserted, where there is too much boasting, demonstrative strength, and self-promotion, there, most likely, insecurity hides. Psychological compensation is when a person proves to the world what they themselves do not fully believe. If someone constantly emphasizes their status, achievements, importance, look closely. They are perhaps desperately protecting that part of themselves they fear losing. True confidence needs no stage or constant affirmation. It is silent, for it knows its own worth. It does not proclaim itself. It simply exists. And its strength is measured not by the loudness of its voice, but by the depth of its inner calm. Seventh, fear governs behavior. Behind most human actions stands not reason, but fear. Not cold calculation, but emotional defense. Haruki understood, a human being is not a logical system, but a creature that has survived through emotions. We fear being rejected, fear failing, fear being unimportant. It is fear that drives us to speak too much, to be intrusive, to avoid intimacy, to flee when things get serious, or, conversely, to control every little detail. These reactions are not to the situation, but to old, unhealed stories within us. A person's behavior is their story, written not in words, but in actions. Understanding another's fear is the first step towards true compassion, and perhaps towards healing oneself. For if we see that behind someone's anger stands fear, and behind someone's indifference, pain, we cease to judge and begin to understand. Eighth, criticism, a mirror, not a verdict. Obsessive, chronic criticism is not an expose of others. It is an admission of one's own internal struggle. Haruki pointed out, when a person persistently condemns something outside of themselves, they involuntarily reveal what they cannot accept within. One who scoffs at another's sensitivity may fear their own vulnerability. One who ridicules beauty may themselves feel invisible, unappreciated. And one who at every opportunity demeans others is most often struggling with a sense of their own worthlessness. The essence of criticism is not in its object, but in its source. Look not at what is said, but from where it is spoken. Sometimes, words directed at the external world are a cry from within. It is the cry of a soul that cannot otherwise express its pain. Ninth, people speak from pain, not logic. We are accustomed to taking others' words literally, but most utterances are not products of pure reason, but a cry from a wound. A person speaks not from logic, they speak from pain. Behind cold arguments, behind biting comments, behind categorical stances, there always hides trauma. One who rejects love may have been betrayed. One who laughs at feelings may never have known what safe intimacy is. Haruki would advise, do not rush to dispute someone's beliefs. First, ask yourself what pain lies behind that conviction. Only then can you understand the person and not just their position. For every word that emerges from the depths of our being is permeated not only by thought, but also by the experience that has shaped our consciousness. 10th, behavior, an unconscious narrative of pain. People rarely speak directly about what wounds them, but they always show it. Disappearing without explanation, constant jokes that mask discomfort, obsession with work, superficial connections instead of deep intimacy. These are not merely habits. These are survival mechanisms. And each one says, this is what I fear. This is what I avoid. This is how I cope with what was once too painful. Haruki believed, if you learn to see these recurring patterns, you will cease to be surprised and will begin to truly understand. To understand means to touch, not to judge. Now you have a framework, not for condemnation, but for clarity. Not for analyzing others, but for becoming more human. These 10 truths are not about manipulation or exposure. They are about the ability to see deeper. They remind us, every behavior is a confession. Every accusation is a projection. Every exaggeration is an attempt to protect something. And every disguise is a once unprotected soul. When you see that behind a loud voice may hide a quiet fear, and behind a rigid stance, an old pain, you will stop reacting and begin to empathize. Understanding is not weakness. It is an act of inner strength. And to see a person beyond their defenses is perhaps the most human of all abilities. Haruki wrote, "He who fights with monsters should look to it that he himself does not become a monster. Indeed."